All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome to another Learning Tech Talks where, hey, today we are exploring the landscape of learning, and I'm going to say workplace technology, because this whole immersive thing is more than just a training tool. But I'm joined by Guido Helmerhorst, right? How'd I do?
Very good.
Not too bad.
Very good.
All right.
Not too bad.
And I know. Well, and so he's from WarpVR. And we are going to talk about, I will continue this conversation on immersive tech, because while it's trickling its way into conversations with learning leaders and more research is coming out about it, and I think the practicality of it is starting to sink in for folks, it's still not where it needs to be as far as I'm concerned. So I was excited because Guido said, hey, let's jump on, let's talk about this. And I think we're going to be able to bust some of the misperceptions that a lot of people may have about immersive tech and what they can do with it, what it takes to pull it off, what it might cost. I mean, we're going to get into a bunch of stuff. But before we do, let's just kind of get into things and engage, so people know you a little better. But also, yeah. I like to invite people into the discussion, because it's way more fun when they ask questions and comments along the way and we bring them in. So all throughout the thing, message people and be like, ask your questions, because this is your chance type of a thing. But while we're doing that, for you, Guido, where are you in the world? And if you're watching, comment in and tell me where you're joining from. But all right, let's see. And surprise, it's not what it looks like in the background. So I'll talk about that in a second. But where are you right now?
Definitely. Thank you, Christopher, for having me. I am in the Netherlands. And to be more specific, we're in Delft. Close to Rotterdam, so a little bit south of Amsterdam. I'm Dutch, obviously, so this is where I've been born.
Yeah, obviously. That was exactly what I thought when you joined. I went, you know what? Dutch, I think so.
Dutch, that's it.
All right. So I'm where I always am. I'm in my studio here at home. But what's funny story while we're warming up to this is right before we went live, I told Guido, go grab something to drink, because we're going to be talking for a bit and you're going to get parched. And he walked through the brick wall behind him, which just cracked me up, because he's figured out how to get the green screen thing working in StreamYard, which he's ahead of me on this. But anyway, you got a different setup than it looks like there. I like the one that you have.
Definitely. Thank you.
So let's give a little bit of context to who you are, because I am curious. We've had a few conversations along the way, but other folks may not be familiar with Guido or WarpVR. So let's start with you. Well, how did you get into VR, since it just started in 2020? This is like a 2-year-old technology. So I'm really, I'm really curious how you found your way there.
I know. And then I'm old, when you say it's 2 years. Now I feel old, because I've messed around with it since 2015, 2016. Okay. Right. Okay. So we, together with my co-founder, we founded WarpVR in 2017. And before that, I spent almost 9 years at KLM, so the airline, okay. Right?
Yep.
Did various roles and Air France KLM stuff. Started in the IT, but also moved to headquarters. I moved around, and at a certain point, I kind of decided / got the opportunity to start a small startup on gamification and serious games within the corporate, because I thought, this is something we need for also internal engagement and employees.
Okay, so serious games, though, just to make sure the nuance.
Yes.
Okay, you were actually building serious learning games. Got it.
Well, and trying to kind of, the human-centered design was just up and coming. It's really about kind of trying to get that engagement up. And because I had the opportunity, I went through all out the organization, right? KLM is like 30,000 people, different business units. So I just knocked on doors to say, hey, this is interesting. We should do something. But
literally knocked on doors.
Literally, definitely. Now, and it was in the time that was the high tides of the financial crisis. So a lot of people said, "Hey,
okay.
welcome, super cool, but we
Love
don't
it.
have
Don't have any
love
money
it."
right now. Would absolutely
So
engage. Sorry, my bank
uh,
account's empty.
exactly. So that was a bit of putting me off, but I kept going, and it also brought me into kind of the learning space, right? So because gamification, employees, you kind of get pulled towards those departments also throughout KLM.
Okay.
And at a certain point, I kind of connected the dots on one learning, training, but for large corporations, large groups of people in an operational environment, right? Because the show must go on, and still you need to train on assets. You need to train cabin crew who is up in the air when they're working or at home when they're not working. So how do you grab them? And at that time, I also
and they
stumbled
probably don't
upon
have
virtual
fake
reality.
airplanes in their backyard to practice in.
Exactly. Those are quite expensive assets. And for the past 2 years, it was a bit different. But back then and now again, those things have to be up in the air making money and not be on the ground as a training facility, right? So I thought, okay, so how can I connect the dots on gamification, making it more interesting, being able to train on the job in such an operational environment. And I came across virtual reality, and I thought, okay, so if we can make an interesting virtual digital learning environment that is also scalable, that could be huge, right? So that's kind of where it all started.
Because you can't send everyone an airplane, but you might be able to give them an experience in a virtual airplane.
Definitely.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
So then you moved. Okay. So then that's kind of where WarpVR. Now you've got a team of folks, and were you focused on the airline industry in the beginning? Was that kind of your primary audience?
Well, yeah. In a way, yes. So we started. We did an evacuation training, for example, and I still maybe to elaborate a bit on that example, because we all know it, right? Because we all know those evacuation drills. The alarm goes. Everybody walks out.
Active shooter. I just have been dealing with like active shooter training. That's been a recent thing within organizations. So these types of things where something hits the fan and you need to know what to do, and looking at a PowerPoint deck or watching a video saying, hey, do this when things go chaotic. It's not really giving you the kind of experience you need to know how to handle it.
Exactly. And for us and for me, the key point there is that when you are actually in such a situation, it's emotional, right? It's chaos. Things are happening. And that whole situation has an impact on you, on kind of the fight, flight, or freeze mechanisms, right? So the whole idea that we started on is saying, okay, so if we can put you in that situation before actually experience it in real life, we can provide you with that baggage to have more brain power, basically. Not to be thrown away.
Well, no, because the stress response kicks in, and you're not
exactly.
This is part of why the military trains so excessively, because it's like, if we can get you to not have to cognitively think because you just react and you inherently know what to do because you've done it so many times. Like you said, you have the cognitive capacity to make those critical decisions when something changes or when something pops up that you weren't expecting, instead of going, I'm tapped because I'm just even trying to figure out up from down right now.
Exactly. And they have actually the military has a great term for that. It's action intelligence.
Okay, there you go. Action intelligence. I told you if there was something that I was going to make a little thing that would scroll along the bottom. So there we go. I'm going to do that now. There we go. It's going to scroll across the bottom so that everybody remembers that's what it's called. Okay. So let me do this, because we are just scratching the surface on this one. But let's talk a little bit, just so people understand, because you're from WarpVR. We get, you got the serious games migrated and transformed into VR. I want to go deeper on the simulation piece, because I think there's this people react, you know, kind of, they go, okay, I get that, but then there's a whole nother world that is going untapped. So you started a company in VR, but that's like saying I started a technology company. What specifically space do you play in the VR space? Because that could be as deep as the ocean is wide.
Yeah. Nowadays it is. Back then it was a little.
That's true. That's true. Not everybody was going around saying I have a VR company. Now it's a little bit more common to say, hey, we have a VR company.
Definitely. No, but we play in the 360 video space, right? So you basically have two worlds or two parts of VR. You have the 3D modeled, computer generated, which we know from games also. And the other part,
the full virtually simulated world.
Exactly. And the other part is 360 video, right? So video as we know it, but then all around you, right? So you can look behind you, above, beyond. That's it. But that means real people, real locations, real situations, which you can film quite easily with a 360 camera, right? Which are now, well, readily available. Back then, different ball game. We played around, we messed around. We had a lot of 6 cameras mounted in one, but now they're small and ready to go. But that's an important part. So we play in that field.
Before we go into that though, because I told you I was going to just jump in, because I will say I'm familiar with 360 video and have been toying around with 360 cameras and that for a bit, but I'm surprised there's still a fair amount of people that are like 360 video and they may not know what it is or how it's captured. So let's unpack that a little bit, because if you haven't, I mean, the best example I can think to tell people is like, if you go to YouTube and search for a 360 video, use your mobile device, and literally you're watching an actual video, but you can sit and look around and see everything, which some people might think like, oh, that's ridiculously crazy to try and create, but you can get these 360 cameras very inexpensively. And I know I've worked with orgs, not even recently, like years ago, where we had these things, we pushed them around, and we were able to capture 360 video extremely quickly.
Yes. Yeah, so the hardware, it's like you have a really decent, good quality camera for already $500, right? Even less.
Yep. Yeah.
A little equipment, tripod with it. So with like $800, you have a full-blown kit which you can work with. And they're really easy to operate. You just click a button. You have to walk away, right? Because otherwise you're in the video. So you have to duck.
Yeah. Otherwise, and you have seen those 360 videos where like the person, they didn't crop themselves out of frame or make sure that they have it on, you know, and all of a sudden they're sitting, you know, you're like, which to be fair, I've actually done some of these where we did that intentionally. So it felt like you were walking next to a person and they were they were kind of your guide. You could kind of say, oh, you know, you can look over as though you're interacting. So there is a way to do it and have that be intentional. But when it's not intentional, it is kind of funny. Anyway,
definitely.
That's just, I just wanted to unpack that a little bit, because I think sometimes one of the challenges with tech is we can make assumptions that everybody knows exactly what we're talking about. And we throw 360 video and people may go, I'm not 100% sure what that is. But I think it's valid to unpack. Okay, so that's the space you're playing, is you're blending this kind of immersive environments with real video, but a different medium of it.
Yeah, in a way. And so that is our canvas, right? So the 360 video is our canvas, and kind of the added layer we put on top is interactivity. So it's scenario story based. It's literally like a decision tree, where based on your decisions, you basically jump into another video. Only because of the smoothness, because of the transition, you really feel that you're in that situation. You don't really notice that. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think the term that I think a lot of folks in learning would probably relate to with this is branching. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a branched experience where you're going through this, and based on your decisions, Although I may be dating myself here, but you know, the choose your own adventure books. Remember those things where you would like read along the book and then you would pick your outcome. And then based on that, you turn to whatever, and it completely changed the story. But we're saying you're doing that with video.
Yes. That's I use that choose your own adventure in my deck actually. So it's there's our old book, but certain people remember. That's of certain age.
I know. Now you did. I do want to pull it up because since we're talking about this, just so people get a sense of, well, what do we mean by this? Because you do have you've got an example in frame. So I do want to pull it up because I do think it's worth talking a little bit about this, because this is a little bit different than most people even may be thinking in their heads of, well, how immersive? Because one of the pieces of feedback I sometimes get is, well, it just doesn't feel real enough. And this is a bridge between that, right?
In my opinion, it is, right? Because this is a telecom store scenario. So this is actually London, where you are one of the store employees, and a customer walks in the store and you have to, basically provide the customer service. But as you will see, she's a bit annoyed with the service she got. And it's on you. So it's really also first person perspective. It's on you to deal with that situation. All right. So this is, I think it's without sound. Well,
it's fine, but we can kind of chat while it's happening. So there's two videos going on here, right? What's his name here in the blue shirts? The actual guy driving the
Actually, his name is Danny, so he's one of the co-founders.
Okay. Well, there you go, Danny.
Danny. So he has the goggles, and you see what he is seeing, right? So that's kind of the mindset you have to be in. So now she's actually talking to you, right? So she's not pleased. You know, you're taking 500 pounds of my bank account. What the hell, right? And then the question is, how do you respond? And you have different options. And based on your choice, the option you choose, she will respond, right? And what you just saw now is that you can also move from place to place, right? So we call that a direction. So you can also move. So we have different forms of interaction, which allows you to play or create the story as a learning designer, create the story which you want to provide to your trainees.
Okay. And I think that part, which again, so, and the one thing I will notice that I did see on that can be a sticking point, especially with wearables, is some folks get a little tripped up when they actually physically have to walk around. And it looks like you're actually designing this. There was some movement. The participant was moving, but it wasn't, Danny didn't have to walk around and trip over the conference room table type thing. So he's standing still, he's moving, looking and engaging with his hands, but he's not having to walk across the room and pick something up or anything like that.
No.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the design of that, because on the surface, you could look at that and it could go two ways. And I want to unpack both, because you could look at that and go, that's easy. And you could grossly underestimate the effort that goes into that, because there's the actual technical component, but there's also just the design component of thinking about that. Or you could overlook that and say, oh, what a lot to have to do. Like, there's just no way we could ever do that. So I want to talk, let's start with the technical piece, I guess. Let's start with the technical piece. Someone had to capture that with a 360 camera. So is someone staging this? And again, I'm thinking scalability. The scalability is great because you do this once and it's now scalable for the org.
Yes.
But someone somewhere is actually going out and thinking through, okay, we need to map out this whole thing. What are all the interactions? What are all the little snippets? What are all the possible reactions that might happen? And we need to capture all of this as video and make it feel like it's not skipping all over the place.
Yeah, true. So Ed, now we're talking about kind of how do you design such a scenario? Right? What is the process to get to such a scenario? Right.
Fair. So, you know what? We should have started there in the first place.
Maybe. But no, actually, I think yeah, I always start at the experience, because now we can tie it back on,
We
okay,
can reverse engineer it. You've seen it.
exactly,
You've seen what it is. Now we
exactly,
can reverse engineer. How do you actually bring
exactly.
this thing to life?
Yes. So for us, so that's why we basically built Warp Studio, which is a platform, a SaaS platform, which enables and helps companies to create such storyboards, such scenarios, to distribute them, to get them to the users, and also have the analytics on the choices people are making. So, but let's start at the first part, creation of the scenario.
Okay.
We start, of course, at the learning objective, right? So what is the objective? What should be learned? What is the situation? Where am I? Who am I? What are the right choices? What are the less stellar choices? And all
which which on that one should not, let's call this out, because we called it out backstage, should not be by the end of this simulation you will know XYZ. This is very behavior based. If you watch that video, this is like, how do you make the right choices? What should you be doing from an action, behavior, interaction thing? Not like, what stuff are you going to recite to this person so that they, you know, please list the following SOP requirements to this individual.
No. And I think, you know, that's also where I think this lies, in the sense that we know e-learning, we know the PowerPoints, we know the knowledge-based learning part. And kind of on the other end of the spectrum, you have those real life exercises in a classroom with actors, but that's not scalable, right? It's not. And it's difficult to organize. It's sometimes not even a safe learning environment, because you're there with your peers and you might be laughed at, because, you know, if you're learning, you're making mistakes. But making mistakes in such a setting is not always kind of appreciated. So I think we're in the middle of that, right? Okay. So when you take your knowledge, or not even a bit of knowledge, right? Maybe even basic knowledge, and then you just go into a scenario and you play it, you learn by doing, you learn by experimenting, you learn by falling and standing up again, right? As we as humans all learn. And that's how you experiment in doing the right things, and experience consequences of the choices you make, and then backtrack and try it again, right? So that's the whole philosophy we built this thing on.
Okay. But that's a different, again, going back to your point on that, that's a different way of thinking about it, because this isn't about what do you know, it's what do I actually want you to do? How, you know, if you're X person in this storefront and this customer standing there, what do I actually want you to do when you interact with that person? And it's just a different way of thinking about experience and saying, okay, well, what would good look like? What would a good customer experience look like? And how do we actually simulate that?
But and at the same time, what does the not so good or you know, less stellar look like? Because you are forced to also think about the consequences, right? So because it's a brand scenario, people can make mistakes. We you know, in that sense, applaud making mistakes, because then you learn even better why something else is a better choice in that situation, right? And that also boils down for us in kind of what we call the story-based approach, right? So you are a person in that store. You are looked at.
You're the main character.
You're the main character. And based on your decision, the story unfolds. And I think that's, and we talked about that a little bit beforehand, that's kind of the mindset shift we need to do. What we see in when we work with clients, in doing the workshops, in providing the kind of the tools and the mindset on story-based scenarios, right? So how can you use that 360 canvas? Because as you're no longer dependent, for example, if you use video, on a director where he or she is looking, but you know, what are you using? What is behind them, or what is besides them, right? So it's very situational. And as a learning designer, you should think about the possibilities and use that 360 canvas.
Well, and again, I think sometimes we open up these possibilities and it can feel a little overwhelming because like I love your director analogy. Instead of being like, okay, I'm the director and I'm in control of what this person is seeing, thinking, taking in, you have to say, well, no, I need to think about everything because I can't necessarily control what they may be doing. They may, and again, these open up the possibilities of what other distractions might we need to create in the environment that replicate the actual employee experience. And I think this is where understanding the employee experience is really critical. Because in that video you showed, if it was a vacant store with one person just standing there, it would, I mean, it would be like, I mean, this is fine and all, but this isn't actually what it's ever like. Where you watch that, it's like, well, that looks like a legitimate scenario type of thing. So with that, I am curious because you've got something kind of pulled up in the queue, which is where I want to go next. Because branching, I'm curious your take on this because this can be Pandora's box. You start opening this thing and you can be like, holy smokes. But with that, where have you found success with drawing the line between authenticity and close enough? Because I can see, even in terms of kind of this experience mapping, I'm sure it's never happened, but play with me here for the sake of hypotheticals. Where people just get hung up on really, really niche, crazy details of like, well, that's not actually the display setting that we have in these stores. And you go, okay, I mean, this is not the point of it. But at the same time, going back to my point of it's an empty store, nobody's there. You also can't swing to the other side where, well, we just want them to get the concept. So where do you find that right line is, especially with 360 video, where you are dealing with real life, where it's enough that people kind of get immersed and go, okay, this feels right, without getting hung up on, because again, you could end up going, we need to make 379,000 versions of this scenario because that's not exactly what every store looks like.
No. Okay. So I think for me, you're hitting 2 points there. So one is, it's a scenario. So in a way, you have to limit yourself, right? Because you cannot branch endlessly. So it's not a free roam game as we sometimes also know from gaming.
It's not an MMO where you just go do whatever you want all day long.
Exactly. And if you want that as an organization, that's all good and fine. But one is the development time, and two is the budget, right? So bring multi-million-dollar budget because otherwise it won't work, right? So that's be my guest. But it's more about, okay, what is the learning objective? So that's exactly where it's for us. It's also the challenge to help selecting the right topics, to make it not too broad and not to bring in too much learning objectives. Oh, we should bring in this and this and this, and then it just that. So you have to make choices. But there are two things in that, because we enable people to do it themselves. You can make a lot of scenarios yourself, right? So it's also a matter of budget and time. So because we make it quite easy to create yourself, you can create multiple, right? So you don't have to have one Hollywood production, the whole shebang. You can make multiple.
Oh, we're going in. This is the one. This is the one. Steven Spielberg shoot, and after this, that's it. Okay.
No, so that's where kind of the platform and that usability and the democratizing of VR comes in, putting the tools in the hands of the organization, basically. And
I think that's a good point to call out from a user standpoint, because historically that hasn't been something we had the power to control. Historically, it was, okay, if we were going to design a sim, we're joking about the Steven Spielberg production, but that's what it used to be. I mean, you were setting up Jaws and you had one take and it's like, this is what we got to do because we're burning all our budget on this. So I hope we got it right, because we're not going to be able to update this for another 7 years type of a thing. And that's being democratized. So you can go, we don't have to. The story has changed. Situations, we need another pathway or a divergent path. We can create that.
That's super easy. So it's literally drag and drop, right? So you can just drag and drop. So it's I'm just showing you, but
I'll pull it up. There we go.
Okay,
I didn't have it in screen. Now I do.
No. Okay. So like I said, this is literally drag and drop. So actually, the scenario you just saw is this scenario. So this is the back end of the scenario.
So this is the back end of that video we looked at before. Was
exactly right. So it's approach the customer. It's what do you say to the customer, and based on your decision, you go into another scene, which are short. It's very decision based, and in the end, you have like 3 endings, right? So it's the 5-star ending. Everything was right. Top job. 3 stars and 1 star. Right? So, and I won't elaborate too much, but this is how easy. Yeah, it
reminds me of my kid's snap circuit set. It's like you just kind of like grab the little wires and go, this one goes here, this one goes here, this one goes in 2 different directions, type of a thing. Which this should look familiar to a lot of designers.
Exactly. And and it also here, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake, right? Because you can correct it, you can reconnect it to say, oh no, it should be here. It doesn't matter, right? So it's really about that iterative way of working also in the creation process. So you can create a small thing, test it. So you can create such a scenario in, let's say, 2 weeks, easy.
Okay. So, and this would be, I'm just even thinking through workflow. So again, I'm processing all this in my head. So you may go into this and say, okay, we've identified a situation, which again, a story, which shouldn't be War and Peace, right? You're not doing this for a 500,000 page book that's going to take forever. You're thinking, all right, we've got a story we need to tell. We have a character. We have the experience. We need to think about the different ways they go through it. And you're actually storyboarding it in this saying, what happens next? And based on what happens next, what choices do they have? And based on those choices, where do they go? Which again is pretty standard for creating a branching scenario that ultimately lands at some sort of outcome. And then you're connecting the little crazy lines in between.
Yeah, and what you do there, so you haven't shot any video, right? So it's pure storyboarding.
Okay, so you're doing that first. You're like, let's get the storyboard right. Let's figure out what we need. Let's map this out and go, do we agree? So I'm thinking even just from a collaboration space, you're not going out with your 360 camera going, let's shoot this and then we'll go back and figure out where it goes. You're saying, let's align on the story, the branches, the different things. Let's get that right. Once we approve, now we can actually do something with it.
Exactly, right? So that's also what you see here. So you describe what should happen in the video, right? So you're thinking about that. And that's kind of the challenge, right? Because you have to think like a kind of a filmmaker. But there are, in our experience, people tend to kind of deem that as scary, but you will get there. It's not difficult. It's you just have to be kind of triggered. Everybody's a storyteller, right?
Yeah.
But we just have to kind of.
But you need those prompts. I think that's one of the things is sometimes people don't know what the prompts, and if you're just like, go tell a great story, what would happen here? They kind of freeze up. But what you're doing is then you're giving people,
really breaking it down.
Break it down. Okay.
And once you have the flow, you basically can export this scenario and have a script. So you can actually have the script, which you can bring to the set. So the video you saw, we filmed in London and we filmed it in half a day because we knew exactly what we needed to film, could be very efficient in the filming. And then afterwards you have the post-production. And then what you do is you upload it to the platform and you connect the media, right? So this is the video again. And this is the interaction elements and you can position it in your video.
Right? Because obviously you don't want it blocking. If you're the character, you don't want those elements blocking your interaction.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And then that's it then, right? Like, I mean, in terms of the creation.
Sorry, but that's it.
Well, no, I mean, it's not like, in a negative, like, that's it. No, but like realistically, I think sometimes people think like this is, And there's complexity behind it. I don't want to understate that, because going back to what we've said about thinking like, you know, a director, a film director, and thinking about the story and what's happening and what do we want to make sure. I mean, that's all skill. That's an art form to be able to be good at doing that. But trying to figure out the technical of like, where do we put all this and how do we pull it together? And then how do we snap that together when we're done into a format that actually is consumable? So then so from there, because now you've got this thing.
Yeah.
Is it deployable hardware? Like, how is this actually getting out to the masses then?
Yeah. So then, so in the end, you hit publish. It will be published and therefore ready for basically anybody to be consumed, right? So that's where, for me, back when I was at KLM, that urge for scalability. How do I train 8,000 people in the hangar or in for cabin crew? How do I do that? So this is when it's published. You can access it via mobile phone, via tablet, or also via, of course, a VR headset, or in combination, right? So that's where, and of course, and even with the mobile phone, you can use a cardboard, and they're all variants of how the experience, I should say. But because it's interactive, because it's a story, because it's basically also immersive, as we like to call it, because it draws you in, right? Because it's a story, you are the hero, you have to act. It's still very engaging, also on the 2D mobile phone.
Okay. Well, and I think what's important about it, because that was going to be my next question, was from a consumption standpoint, because the reality is not everybody has one of these things sitting at their desk. You know, not everybody has one type of a thing. And I think in some ways that can be a limitation, at least in this stage. I have no doubts that we're not that far out from this being like a mobile phone, where if you say, hey, do you have a mobile device? And you say, no, I don't. People go, oh, really? Like, you don't? Okay, why? Are you like afraid of them or something? You know, type of a thing. Just like, you know, I have a friend who still has a flip phone, and I'm always like, a flip phone? Interesting. But I think we're not there yet. And I think that bridge period is important, because not everybody does do this. So when people are deploying this, they could be deploying, I mean, in many ways, this is about interactive storytelling that has the capability to then move into a full-blown immersive headset if you want to.
Yes. Yeah. And therefore you can use it in different ways, right? So you can use it in the classroom where you maybe need 10 headsets or 15 or whatever the number is. But you can also use this to send a, I don't know, safety video to all your thousands of employees during Christmas, which one of our clients did, right? So they actually provided a universal headset, like the cardboard, in the Christmas package, and it went to 16,000 people, right? So, and they could use their own mobile phone.
Though I have to ask about this, though. I have to ask about this one, because the cardboard one, I'm just curious. You strap your phone on, and for folks who aren't, again, we'll do kind of a tech catch up for folks who may, you know, be like, cardboard, like, what are you talking about? Type of a thing. Because I remember that was a big thing for a bit. You could even get print your own things. You could print it off of like your Amazon boxes that showed up at your house. But so you strap people's mobile phones to their face. How's the interaction working with this?
So what you will see when you strap it on, it's you will see a white or yellow dot in the middle of your screen, and as you move your head, it will move basically with you. So once you, for example, on the arrow you saw, when you go to the table, you point that white dot on the arrow, and you will see it fill up, and at the end, it will basically select. So it's kind of what we call gazing.
Okay, got it. Well, because again, I'm just thinking from a user experience standpoint, because it can be very, I mean, it's one thing if everybody's got these nice little joysticks in their hand, because then they can like think, they can touch it, or now, you know, the touch is actually getting much better. But okay, so even
right, Chris, in all honesty, what we saw with clients is that we even that what was it?
Haptic?
No,
the joystick.
The controller, sorry. Even a controller, for some people, for some of the audiences, is still a hurdle, right? So it's a
It is.
thing. It has a lot of
No, from an
buttons.
accessibility standpoint, it is a limitation sometimes.
So we actually build in the gaze input also in the app for the Oculus. So to
Really? Okay.
even make it
Make it
more
easy.
easy to interact with.
Okay. Okay. I'm curious on that one because I can see that actually makes it much easier from an experience because you don't have to, you can literally just look, and where you're
Yes.
looking, then you just wait for it to fill the thing and then you move on.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Do you find people use that even with the Oculus when they have controllers?
Definitely.
Really?
No, and you know, in a way, it kind of depends on the target audience, right? Because if you
Yeah.
have somewhat of an experience, you can easily use the controllers. But for a lot of also first-time users, even putting on the headset is, you know,
It's a
there are all
lot.
these kind of moments which are a lot indeed.
Yeah. No, and I think, and Rudy, I see your question. I'm going to pull that one up next. But I think it should not be underestimated. And I know as I've worked with my teams and just other teams, when you're getting people used to hardware, you can't underestimate the kind of onboarding process to get people comfortable and familiar with it and this and that. I think sometimes it's just like, you know, in learning and development, sometimes we're like, everybody has a camera, just tell them to record video. It's not that easy. Just like you can't be like, hey, just ship out a bunch of headsets and then tell everybody to go do this thing. There's a process of getting people comfortable.
And for us, the use of a tablet or a mobile phone is also what we call stepping stones, because you just see that organizations need those stepping stones to move towards, because everybody sees that, you know, that immersive experience with a headset. Yes, you know, that's where you want to be eventually, but you don't want to wait.
But they don't know the path to get there.
And they don't know the path, but they want to start. So you start creating your content already, which you can distribute then in various ways. But in the end, also you can use it on a headset.
Well, and that's where I'm always interested in, and I'm glad we spent time on this, because I think of these as like bridge technologies where it has the potential to work in these kind of future states where you want to be, but it also works really well in your current environment. Because even going back to, let's say you don't send out all the immersive, you know, cardboard versions, people still have a device, and this makes it mobile friendly so you can go through it. And that's still scenario based learning type of stuff. You upgrade to the cardboard, pretty soon you start doing full immersive, and now you've normalized this to the point where it does this. Okay. So question from Rudy that I'm going to pull up, because the example we used was retail. It was retail, looked like a mobile phone store type of a thing. Are there use cases, and we can get into use cases because I have no shortage of use cases I'd love to sit and unpack with you. But with the tech space or industrial, you know, where you're trying to do more process type things, are people using this for that? And just, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So to understand the kind of the context, is like industrial, like an airline, for example, right? Or
let's talk manufacturing or something like that. You know, manufacturing,
right.
Or maybe we've got some manufacturing stuff, and it's very process driven. Like you're trying to make sure somebody understands how do you. And I'll give a good example. I've been involved with some manufacturing companies in the past, where some of what you're trying to do is a scenario of how do you disassemble this thing, or how do you actually go through this process? And I think that's what Rudy's getting at. Rudy, you can clarify if I've got it wrong, but.
Okay. So, yes, you know, this can definitely be utilized in such an environment, also for kind of breaking down those process steps, for example. But the question, of course, is how far do you go with that, or how accurate the practical part should be, right? Because of the lack of controllers, in a way, you cannot do stuff, right? So we are not equipped as a technology to really pick up stuff or whatever, but you can make the decision. So what we often do in such situation is, for example, we introduce a coworker, and then he or she will ask you, okay, should I do this or that? And then you make the decision and you see him or her executing that, right?
Okay.
So you can play around, and at the same time, what we always try to do is, in a way, bring it to real life, right? And what I mean by that is real life is in a way chaotic. Even in a process-oriented place, stuff happens, and that's where
I don't know what you're talking about. My life is smooth
Okay.
sailing every day. It goes exactly according to plan.
Exactly. The same with 6 kids around, or 3 in my case. That's no biggie. But it's that's life, right? So that happens. So we also try to bring that into the equation, because and that's also the part, for example, on safety and safety awareness. Often that is trained in a very almost one-dimensional way, right? So you get a picture, and then the question is, okay, what is unsafe here? There's a cable loose or whatever, and it's kind of find it, right?
But the what happens type of a thing is missing.
Exactly. Well, in how I would phrase it is that life happens, right? So your manager is breathing down your neck. Your coworker is telling you about his weekend and all his problems, and you have to fix the pump, and everything is happening, and you still have to be safety aware, and that is real life, and that is in the end where we want to get close to. So the answer to Rudy,
I'm so glad you did. No, go for it. Well, no, what I like about that is go finish it. Finish your thought. I told you.
No, but in that sense, and also you can make it as well simple or complex as you want. So yes, process steps. Yes, use co-workers to explain it, and it can be very simple, like an almost onboarding type of thing, right? And you can take it to much more story-based, including also more soft skills in a way. Are you able to say, hey, listen, stop right there. I have a process to finish. So let's join again at lunchtime, right? And not bug me now.
And where I'm thinking about this, and this goes back to what we talked about before we went live, is that I think one of the risks and the watch outs and first of all, one, I also appreciate you not taking the stereotypical, vendor route of we can do everything. Absolutely. It works perfect. The same. You want it, we can do it, which you didn't, because I think your point is, would that be the best use of this kind of thing? I don't know that it would, because at the end of the day, I think this is the shift we as an industry kind of have to struggle through to make, is we need to think bigger than I just need to get you to think linearly through this stuff. So going back to this process, you could translate an SOP into WarpVR and say, well, it's better than the SOP because now you kind of see how it works. Would it be better? Yes. Would it be the best use of it? Probably not, because it might feel like, well, gosh, this thing is now bureaucratic and kind of a pain. I could have just glanced at a job aid. Now I've got to go in and do this whole freaking thing just to go through a process. It could become a very frustrating user experience. But if you know that this is the process, and from a user experience standpoint, you go, but where does this thing blow up? Where does this thing blow up, or we have a risk? And how do we simulate that? Because the goal isn't to try and chain you on all the steps. The goal is, and I'm just thinking the example of the wire. What happens when your phone rings and you think this is no big deal? I'm just going to take this call, and boom, something bad happens. And that's what you didn't think about in the process, because the process just told you, do this, do that, do this, do that. You weren't expecting the phone to ring. You weren't expecting this thing to happen. You weren't expecting this distraction. And will you choose to go? Will you take the bait on that, or will you not? And do you know why we don't want you to? And I think that's where you can take the knowledge piece to the next level and actually create a better experience. Because I think that's, if I'm hearing you, that's just why I was that's awesome. I want to jump on it, because you could, could you replicate it? You could. But I don't know that that would be the best use of it, because you may actually be making a inferior user experience. and missing the opportunity to really highlight where can experience actually accelerate and reinforce the behavior you're trying to get.
Thank you. That's awesome. That's exactly the point, right? And that can be applied to so many things, right? Cybersecurity, right? So we have plenty of questions on, oh, can we do this kind of, you should shut off your computer, or you should always double check the phishing emails and that kind of stuff. So in essence, you should not do that in VR. Right, because that's boring as hell, and you shouldn't do that. But even in VR. But the question you want to answer is, okay, but how does that fit in a situation? What is the story which also happens, right? Friday afternoon, your colleagues are going out, and you get an email saying, hey, you should pay this. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with people pulling you out? And are you in that sense strong enough to counter that, right? Or to be aware that you should focus first here and then there. So there are all these scenarios, and yes, it's endless, but I think there's a lot of learning to be done in providing at least one or a couple of such situations for people to be aware and get aware of those distractions, which then ultimately have an impact you haven't foreseen, but now can experience, because now you can experience an actual consequence and say, oh shit, sorry, excuse my language, but how can
don't worry, it's PG-13. Okay, there's no, believe me, there's no kids watching this. No. Well, and so I'm gonna tackle a tough one with Steve here, because I think this is one of the things that I see people struggling with, where they're like, okay, but it still feels like costs are high, benefits are still a little not sure, things like this. What are some of the use cases? And I think you've shown one there, but I want to jump in on it, because I think one of the things we're getting at is, one, costs aren't as high as they used to be. And even with this, what we're saying is costs don't have to be high, because stepping into this, people already have a mobile device. So this bridge technology to me is one where you can go, all right, now we need to think about experience, and we don't have to think about wearables as a barrier from a cost standpoint. But I think the other thing that I would do, and I'll share a personal example, and I'd love to hear from you too, is, us making the shift. And Rudy, I'm so glad you asked that question with the process point. Where I've seen people run down this path and it hasn't been successful, and they've gone, that wasn't worth it, was they were pursuing the tech for the sake of the tech, instead of saying, wait, where are we going to think differently about this? To the example of, we're going to make an SOP in VR. Is that really solving a problem, or is that adding complexity and a bad user experience to things? And then it seems as though the tech isn't helping, versus reinforcing that. And the one example I'll use is, I had a situation with a healthcare company, a med company, that was trying to figure out how to simulate doctors having difficult conversations with patients, which is not something you want to mess around with in real life. You do not want to tell someone that their child has stage 4 cancer, and it's the first time you've ever said this to someone, and you don't really know how to handle it. This is not an environment you want to be testing out things. And we were able to say, okay, yes, we have our kind of knowledge set. Yes, we have our other components of the experience. We need to make sure people know what they're dealing and all that. But we can't really fake a conversation with a parent who's just going to find out there's a good chance their kid's not going to make it through next year. And those were the kinds of things where that took a shift in mindset to say, hey, we need to think differently about this as learning professionals, because that to me is where the magic happens, is where you go, okay, whoa, now that can have business impact, because, hey, we can get data on what happens when it doesn't go well. And you deal with your lawyers, you deal with your legal teams, your compliance teams, and say, what happens when things go bad? And they can tell you what happens when things go bad and the frequency in which they do go bad, so that you can say, well, what if we could get those bad things to happen less? And the way we do it is by giving people exposure to that and help them, going back to, I'm going to pull it back up, create more action intelligence in them to be able to say, I'm faced with this really tough situation. I instead of thinking like, holy crap, I don't know what to do, and stumbling, going, I do know what to do. And now I can focus and make the right decisions. And I've done this for orgs multiple times because there is still some skepticism, but go ahead.
Yeah. No, maybe to that point, it's also about then being able to repeat that, right? So being able to maybe be in such a situation because you know you will be in an actual situation tomorrow, right? So then you go back, and that's not a situation you might find yourself in often.
A lot.
But it's super important when it really comes down to the wire when you're actually in that situation. So you want to be prepared to the max. And I think this is a way to help you prepare for such a situation. So maybe also to the question. One, the cost part. So I'm curious what the people out there and even you think is very costly, but you of course have the production or the creation cost depending on if you use external people for 360 video.
Yeah, if you hire a professional film crew to come in and shoot the whole thing, but that's external to the tech.
Yes, exactly. And you can still mix it, right? So you can make your own scenario and then ask the external film crew to actually shoot the video because you tell them exactly what you want and then they can bring it in. So there are all these variances on how to deal with that. But we are let's say around 20K, you have a really decent scenario. Just to kind of put a number on that. The other part is, okay, so what are some really best practices in that sense? So one that always comes to mind is the bank robbery we did for Erste Bank, right? So a typical situation where you want to train your people in, but hopefully you will never encounter. But when it does, it's super important to have kind of not that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism kick in, but to have at least some ability, hopefully, to look at some of the characteristics of the perpetrator, and then you can actually tell the police, right? So it's that simple. It's that is the process. And up to, well, let's say a year and a half ago, I think one or two employees of Erste Bank would fly around the country to every branch they had, and they have like a couple of hundred, to basically bring their PowerPoint and train them on what to do in a bank robbery. But now every branch has a headset, and the employees can train whenever they are ready. And I think that's and one thing we maybe is important also to mention is that you can really easily connect it to a learning management system, which allows you to really make it part of a learning path. So that's one. Another is the Dutch railroads. So I can, across the employee journey, basically, you see more and more use cases, but it's very important, I think, and I'm really happy that we picked on that we had this point on the table. Choose your how do you say it? Choose your content, choose the application, choose where you want to carefully, definitely.
Yeah,
but choose though and start.
Yeah, well, I think that's just it. And where I'm continuing to try and encourage people is like test. I mean, what you just mentioned in terms of the pricing stuff, I like if you're outsourcing an e-learning, you're probably paying in that. I mean, that's where some of the stuff that we would do anyway is not, it's in the same range as what we would do for some of the other work we do. And I think if you can train your teams internally, you can start to bring that cost even lower. So
yes.
But I think the other piece with it is a lot of the power sits in our hands. And that's where I think what we talked about in the beginning is so critical, is this making the shift and identifying where are those behaviors, where do we focus on that? Because if you're using immersive tech for knowledge sharing, it's not the right use case. And I think that's one of the things that is a challenge for folks, is to say, wait a minute, because even in some of the conversations, sometimes our stakeholders don't always even know, well, what are the behaviors we actually want to drive? And I think that's a different conversation we're having of, well, what behaviors are we driving? What doesn't go right? What does that look like? What do we want it to look like? I mean, again, I've used this for manager stuff pretty regularly, having tough conversations with employees. You don't get a lot of chances to practice those. And you don't really want to practice laying someone off when you're laying them off. That's not a real good time to go, okay, hang on. Stop crying for a second. Let me try this again. I don't think I did that. Like, not the time to practice this stuff. So
and maybe one thing, because still we see also applications in the classroom, right? Also for soft skills. So we even have now off-the-shelf content. So you can start tomorrow if you want. But the point is that when you use it in a classroom, everybody has a shared experience, though different, because they make different choices. And then you can use the data in kind of the peer-to-peer or group session in saying, hey, guys, in this particular moment, you guys made this decision, but you two made this decision. How come? What was the thought process? How
we didn't even get into the measurement piece.
I know, because but it's shifting from kind of a third person. I would do this, right? And then it's easy.
Did you
would do it? But now, did you? Exactly. And I think now you can really deepen that learning when you have people also, in kind of that training setting.
Okay. Well, I knew we would run long out of time before we ran out of things to talk about, but I really appreciate your time, Guido. And again, I think this kind of gap that we're bridging to say, hey, where do you start? How can you get into this? Not that you dump everything from, well, we used to do it this, now we do it this, but really be thinking about where might we do that and what changes do we need to make? Because again, the success of this, while the tech enables it, it's largely in our hands as practitioners in how we use it and where we choose to wield it. So thanks for making the time. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks everybody for joining, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the week.